So good afternoon. I'm not sure if the introductions were just done there, but I'm Ben Watts. I'm the head of content for the UK-based market intelligence and defence publisher Shephard Group. Thanks for sticking around and coming to join us after lunch, and also thanks to the organisers for inviting all of us here today. We've got an interesting discussion on Europe's industrial base and procurement transformation. Obviously, you've already been introduced to our panel, so we won't bother doing that again, but thanks for joining us. So let's start. Page. So Europe has clearly discovered the language of defence industrial ambition. I think that's been quite clear from lots of the talks that we've had this morning. But ambition is not the same as output. Where specifically is Europe already strongest as an industrial base, and where are the most serious bottlenecks that could prevent it from scaling fast enough? And I'd like to start with you, Evie.
Okay, good afternoon, actually. I would really like to thank the audience, because after lunch it's not easy to come back and to listen to a very interesting panel that will have discussion today. I would say from the European Commission point of view, we're acting as facilitator to have an industrial ecosystem that could support in particular now, the immediate surge in demand. So in that sense, what can we use as horizontal tools that could be useful for the armed forces, for the nations actually, that they are the ones who are in charge of the capabilities. We do have some actions on simplification to cut the administrative burdens in processes, to go quicker and faster. In innovation, we really want to bring more tech and more disruptive innovation in the supply chains to have a better military products at the end. So this is, and we believe that we need to open up supply chains to emerging players so that we can have more diversity and stronger industrial base. And I would say the other challenge that we see is also, of course, security of supply. Supply chains have been weaponized from the critical raw materials to the components, technologies, up to the final products. And as in Europe, actually, nations are importing a lot from non-local sources, actually. So we need to invest more in our, in particular in crisis times, to be more resilient, and in that sense, having local production chains and be mastering better the supply chains at the very longer run. This is something that is really important for us. So we believe that, and I didn't mention actually access to finance, the fact that we facilitate. We're setting also funds of funds or equity, venture capital also investments. We're working together with the EIB, the European Investment Fund, that they lift also recently the restrictions in access to finance. So investing in defense could be also ESG compatible. So this is something that would facilitate the overall uptake for the ecosystem.
Okay, super. Allan, from your point of view, are you able to sort of tell us where you think Europe is strongest as an industrial base?
Yeah, so I work for the NATO Support and Procurement Agency. We were created nearly 70 years ago now to support weapon systems in Europe after the Second World War, which were almost exclusively of US origin. And so the agency has had traditionally a very transatlantic focus rather than a European one. And that has remained the case, I think, certainly until very recent times. But clearly we are seeing a shift, an intent from the European NATO nations to increase resilience through having choices and to provide opportunities for our politicians to choose systems of different origin. And that is clearly driving a focus towards European production. And I think there are two examples, and we just very briefly, we chatted in the room before we came in. The MRTT fleet is a really good example of a European initiative which was birthed by the EDA, brought into service by OCCAR, and then supported in service by the NATO Support and Procurement Agency. And I see other similar trends developing. I think the other point that I'd bring out is that the other trend that we're seeing is European co-production. And we're seeing it with Patriot, and we're seeing it with Stinger missiles. So this is happening now. Very large contracts just signed over the last couple of years, which depend on a European footprint to help co-produce. Not only, of course, is that of industrial benefit to the European nations, but it provides a degree of resilience in terms of sources of supply and a degree of beefing up of the European defence industry. So I could see more of that happening, I think, in the future.
Okay. Camille, from the industrial point of view, are you able to sort of tell us where you think we're strongest as an industrial base?
Well, our industrial base is transforming extremely rapidly.
Yeah.
It is very interesting to watch, to see how fast is the European industry adapting to the new demands of the European customers and beyond. Because we see multiple trends happening at the same time. First of all, of course, budgets on the rise, which is in itself very much transforming the relationship with the customers, with the ministries of defense across Europe, but also much higher expectations when it comes to timelines, prices, and the ability to mass produce. So all of this is transforming the landscape with a combination of two things. I think the major primes are adapting quickly to this new environment. They are offering new solutions. They are looking at ways also to partner with some of the startup ecosystem, which is an interesting development. But they're also looking at ways of adapting their production and scaling up production, which in itself is a really interesting development. And we see, after a fairly slow start, if you take 2022 as the beginning, we see a ramp up that is now happening at fairly high pace. Second thing, and we fixed problems. We fixed the ammunition problem, and there are others that are coming. There are bottlenecks for that industry faces. Some of them are traditional, but the supply chain, especially here, the tier 2 and tier 3 SMEs, we have to pay very specific attention to those. There is an issue of access to a skilled workforce that we have to not lose sight of, because that is really, really important. Access to finance remains an issue, especially again for the SMEs that might face here and there issues. But altogether, I think we have an environment that is much better than what it was, and where I think industry is more capable of delivering, especially at a moment where some of our traditional suppliers are also very focused on meeting domestic demand, namely the US. We see that happening, and I think this is also a bit of a game changer, because we see more and more prioritization, not necessarily in favor of the European markets, coming from some of our traditional suppliers.
Lorenzo, I'm assuming you would agree that things are moving in the right direction. What does success look like in practical terms by 2030?
Well, reinforcing the European industrial base, we'll say, is not easy, since it requires commitment from all the stakeholders, political level, procurement agency, European Union. I will say that everybody is going towards the right direction, but I think that it will take time to be completely independent from other countries, be fully European. Certainly, we're going towards the right direction. We see European Commission is doing a huge effort. Is funding projects. OCCAR, by the way, for which I work, is an international independent organization. We work for our member states. We work on behalf also of the European Commission. We deliver, basically. And we know very well that the business of cooperation is not easy at all. It requires expertise, knowledge. All the stakeholders must be aligned. Industry as well. They should invest long term. And on the other hand, if I was in industry, I would say I need a steady flow of money. Otherwise, how can I bet? If it is only a ramp-up of 2 years, how do I dare to invest so much money? So in the end, I think we are going towards the right direction, but requires all the stakeholders to be fully aligned in the end. As OCCAR, we can certainly facilitate this process. Since we aggregate the demands, European Patrol Corvette is an example. Greece is joining this program. We have never seen, is unprecedented, the most important shipbuilder in Europe. They have created one consortium to build the first really European corvette under an OCCAR program co-funded by European Commission. This is the perfect example of how towards what direction we should go.
We'll move on to the perceived alphabet soup of various procurement bodies and funding mechanisms, many of them on the stage with us today. From the customer and supplier perspective, is Europe institutional architecture, is it helping coordination, or has the number of organisations potentially involved become a barrier to speed and clarity? And I'd like to put that to you, Evie.
Yes, I think a common procurement, as Lorenzo was saying, but also it is one of, we don't do enough joint projects in Europe, that's for sure. So the European Commission, when we started giving some funding mechanisms, is to incentivize this cooperation, because precisely cooperation has a cost, admin cost, but also coordination cost, budgetary not aligned cycles. So I think it's difficult to do, and then it requires also a mindset shift. However, in this current of C-curve change, actually, this revolutionary times that we all live in the geopolitical environment, things have to go at a quicker pace. So in the European Commission, I'm responsible also, among other things, for the review of the defense procurement rules that we have, that the European Commission will table a proposal later this year. And I can tell you that for us, there are three things that are really high on our agenda. The first one is simplification of the procedures, because we have a lot of procedures that are not fit for purpose. They were made probably in peace times, and now we are in a hybrid warfare for short times, and then also our territory is being tested. And also in particular, we'll focus on the innovation, procedures for innovation, because we need to bring more disruptive innovation or more deep tech in our more agility. This is also a lesson that we learned from the Ukraine, actually. So to have speed in the simplified procedures, not only for innovation, would be more speed, agility, and then a bit more risk-taking attitude, so that the final customers there, they would be able to have the best products, also at a lower price, I would say. Then the other second priority that we have is how we can facilitate cooperative procurement, be it in framework contracts that are already there, that other nations can chip in with the same conditions, favorable conditions. Are there actually also some carrots that we can give at the European level so that nations can work better together, because it's about trusting your neighbor and working together. As we have cross-border industrial partnership, we would like also to have more cooperation. And the fact that we've seen that the EU member states, they've been taking together the SAFE loans, 150 billion, Ukraine support loans, or most of them are, a big majority is working together. So we see that the mentality also changes. And the last point that it is high on our agenda is how we can have better security of supply in terms of crisis, that Camille was talking about. They are not being delivered. Nations, because of reprioritization by our suppliers, actually. So in that sense, if we were able to have better, more production lines in our territory, so this gives actually, we have the know-how, we have the technology, and we have the money now, I would say, also from the public side, but also more from the private side. So in that sense, we will have better guarantees to be for a security of supply in terms of crisis. So these, I would say, these are the three key priorities for working better together.
And we were talking, the reason we were late, we were talking in the room about how you two were agreeing on a similar conversation, I believe, last night. Are you able just to sort of add to those points?
Maybe, I mean, two things. Is of course, the list of the issues to tackle is roughly the same. So indeed, when we talk about security of supply, it is a multiple layer task. At one level, you want the European industry to be capable of delivering some of the critical enablers that currently are only valuable to NATO through the United States. So there, you want the European industry to be in a position, and the Europeans altogether to be in a position to host those, to deliver those capabilities, which is a multi-year endeavor. But I have no doubt that the Europeans master the technology, and in some instances it will be in cooperation with the US. In others, it will be a European solution. And we see that happening at the moment on something like airborne surveillance as we speak, literally in the NATO context. Second element that we need to do is indeed look at the supply chain per se. So is it good to rely on external solutions or non-European solutions or not. And I think there I would put aside the politics, but really look into more of the issue of we have global markets that are a bit overheating. So the domestic solutions, domestic meanings European solutions, in that particular case offer a more degree of certainty than going for external suppliers that might prioritize, for a good reason, by the way, for national use or other priorities. Thirdly, there is the element of the critical components. So it might be semiconductors, it might be critical raw materials, and there I think there is really a need to work much deeper collectively as Europeans to make sure that those are available, because it suffices one piece of electronics or one shortage of a critical raw material to completely disrupt the production line. And there I think we need to be much better than we've been traditionally, because we are no longer in this moment where we look at the global market and we say, oh, it's okay to get everything from China and that's going to be fine. We know it's not going to be fine. We know there might be problems. We've already experienced some very specific problems as an industry, and so we need to be focused on getting that right and having, at a minimum, alternative sources for those critical components or those critical raw materials. So all of this does address a sort of supply chain element, which I believe, and I'll end on this, creates lots of opportunities for companies in that supply chain across Europe, because suddenly the idea that you go to a single source and things like that is no longer relevant. So if we want to ramp up, we need to involve the whole ecosystem to mobilize all of the resources, and also to have options available in a variety with a variety of suppliers, so that when something happens, and things happen, as we've noticed recently in the Gulf, you're not facing a shortage of a critical element that disrupts your production capacity.
Yeah, it brings us nicely a nice route into the NATO-EU synergies as well. Allan, are you able to perhaps add to that as well, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's important that nations, institutions have a choice, and there is a congested marketplace out there, and it's important that nations have the tools, access to the tools that they choose to use. They are, after all, spending their own taxpayers' money. So whether that be NATO, a transatlantic piece, whether it be a more European-focused thing, almost doesn't matter. It's important that those choices exist. The challenge, I think, is that there is inevitably overlap. And we will all say that we want to avoid unnecessary duplication. And we will be told to avoid unnecessary duplication. But the fact is, there is duplication in some areas. And sometimes that's fine. Nations choose to do that, and there's no problem with that. But sometimes it's inadvertent. And that's something I think we need to be very careful about, both from our individual nations, from the entities and the organisations that we represent, and indeed those of us that represent those entities themselves. So there is that sort of dynamic, I think. There is a wicked problem element to this, that we want choices, but on the other hand, we want the efficiencies that come with a focus that sometimes doesn't exist, perhaps to the extent it should. But that's a very difficult circle to square when you're trying to get independence or security of supply, beef up industries in areas that currently perhaps aren't as strong as they need to be. So I think that is an area that deserves ongoing and very careful attention.
One of the things that came up in many of the conversations we had beforehand was this Silicon Valley mantra. Whether you buy into that or not doesn't really matter, but it's the idea of moving fast and breaking things. Lorenzo, what part of European defence procurement should move much faster, and what parts should absolutely not be broken?
Well, if we talk about, with this term, operational requirements, change, that's up to nations. As far as procurement focus, I will say that the old model is still valid, but the procurement agency needs to adapt to the new environment. To make a clear, simple example, European Commission has put 150 billion on safe loans, meaning that European nations should acquire the system by 2030, which it is a deadline. So there is no other way for nations to jump on board of existing programs, for complex programs. And procurement agency like OCCAR must tailor their behavior to these new needs. For example, we have asked and obtained an agreement from our board of supervisors, and we've tailored our regulation to let European nations jump on board on existing programs to get straightforward access. For example, without the intellectual property right, which is a classical thing, we need to move fast forward. We need to tailor, and this is what OCCAR is now doing, for example, in this domain.
Is there anything we should, back to the original question, is there anything that should absolutely not be broken? Is there anything within the system, within the defence procurement system, that needs to stay?
Yeah, it needs to remain.
Yes.
Old-fashioned is okay.
Old-fashioned is okay.
Yeah, I mean, we cannot get rid of, when you have to build a ship, it takes 6 years.
Yeah.
From the requirement, steel cut, and production, no less. I mean, a logistic ship can take 4 years. For that case, you still need old-fashioned procurement. But you need to be aware that to build a ship, you require 4 years, 5 years, and you have to adapt. Another perfect example is another program which has been run by OCCAR, which is the LSS, Logistics Support Ship. It was a program, single nation program, a second nation jump on board. That nation has been able to get the first ship after 3 years, joining an existing programs. So again, aggregation of demands make life easier for everyone.
Okay. I'd like to ask each of you for one practical thing Europe should do next. So if we'll start with Allan down the end there.
So I think the thing that we all need to do, and we've recognised this, and a number of speakers have highlighted already, is make it easier for industry to interface and deal with defence. It is very complicated, particularly as a small SME that doesn't have experience to really understand how you get into, in my case, the NATO space, but whatever, the international space. And particularly if you're an innovative, forward-leaning, man-in-a-shed type company, that's very difficult to get into the defence space. And we need to make it easier, and we need to find the pathways to make it possible. We've touched on a few already with the Greek initiative, the innovative capability, and Diana, and there are others. But that, I think, is an area that we really need to focus on.
Okay. Super. Camille?
No, my proposal, really stands in 3 words. Just do it. At a certain point, stop talking about the ability of Europe to deliver. Move as fast as you can. Work on the acquiring the enablers that will make us less dependent on the US for the defense of Europe, as the US is asking. Make sure it happens, and every day you talk about our ability to do it is a day lost to delivering the capability. So I really argue for this, and then use the entirety of the toolbox. The toolbox offered by the Commission, the toolbox offered by the good procurement agencies that are represented here. And in a way, competition between companies is healthy, competition between solutions is healthy as well. And the key message for me is, where do we want to be in 5 or 10 years from now? And what we want is to be capable of deterring aggression under any circumstances. And for that, we need to get our act together and acquire those capabilities at pace.
Okay, super. Evie?
I would say, for me, my last word would be really how we can facilitate a strong and resilient industrial base to create a better an ecosystem, industry ecosystem. Industry for us, it is very important because the nations and the armed forces, they cannot, they need the capabilities, but who is going to produce the capabilities? So I take the example of Greece, that traditionally was a country with high military expenditure because of its location. And I've seen over the last years the transformation of the Greek defense and defense tech-related ecosystem, opening up and then focusing on some key capabilities. So for us, from the European community point of view, we really need this example, of course, to flourish even further. These kind of small, medium countries to be able to rely in an industrial base that is resilient, that they are excellent. And from, as Camille was saying, we use our toolbox, horizontal toolbox, from the access to finance, to simplifying procedures, to facilitate or to give incentives for cooperation, so that and have more agility in all what we deliver, because we also have to. It's about transformation, transforming procedures from the public side, also transformation of companies, so that we can all work towards this objective. I would say more resilient industry base.
Lorenzo.
Yeah, as a message, I will say that I spent 30 years working in a single service. Then in the last 5 years, I've joined this international organization, working alongside with many other nations, many other stakeholders. And I have to say that cooperation is the key of the future. There is no other chance for Europe than working together to shape our future. And it may look difficult, but in the end, once you build the skills, the expertise, the knowledge, it's a deal. You save money, you save time, you put all the stakeholders around the same table, also industry, rather than competing for raw resources, for skillers. A common decision is taken, and we go forward. This is what we are experiencing now in this new domain with new threats, working with all the nations of Europe, and not only with the 6 member states, since we also work on behalf of other nations, not only European also. This is our view.
On that point, Evie, the European Commission is attempting to support transformation across 27 sovereign defence markets, all with their own ideas, all with their own policies. Where can the Commission really add the most practical value?
Well, I think the value add is the European Commission is always being pragmatic, because we say in defence, member states are the driving seats. So we are facilitating either cooperation or taking out obstacles. So I would simply spend some words on the simplification omnibus that we did, for example, for defense readiness investments by the nations. And I will take the example of permitting. We tabled a very ambitious proposal, legislative proposal, which is currently discussed by the European Council, the nations, and the Parliament for fast-track permitting. And this means that as soon as there is an investment project related to the defense readiness, then the authorities, all the relevant authorities would be, and the file is complete, they will have between 60 working days or up to 150 days actually to take a decision to approve this. This is quick, fast-track approval that it is typically an example of having a harmonized approach across the 27 member states that could be, because we know that permitting can take several years. And at this time, for the defense readiness investments, we really need to go fast, and nations. So it is part of the transformation that public administration also, at national level, needs to do.
Allan, the pressure is obviously there to buy faster and deliver capability sooner. How do procurement agencies accelerate delivery without creating long-term sustainability and interoperability problems that, especially in Europe, may have to deal with and manage in decades to come?
Yeah, I think the key way that we aim to manage that is to aggregate demand and to understand from the very beginning what the total demand is, the totality, so that we can send an aggregated, consistent demand signal to industry, a multi-year signal which encourages investment, and operationally it gives us the downstream benefits of interoperability and ease of maintenance and training and so on, all the other benefits that come from doing things together. So I think they're the areas that we want to concentrate on. It's a challenge. It's been a challenge for a long time, and I suspect will continue to be. But I think just getting incremental wins there can only be a good thing.
Okay, super. How are we doing for time? No one knows. Okay, we'll carry on.
If I may, talking about interoperability, cooperation implies interoperability by default. A perfect example is in access, which is, again, a program co-funded by European Union to develop, in the naval domain, a new way of exchanging information. This will become a STANAG also. So a program managed by OCCAR, co-funded by European Union, which will become a NATO STANAG. That's a perfect example.
Okay. We've got a minute or two left, so I'll let you have the final word, Camille, from the industry perspective.
No, but I think we are in a moment, as I alluded to in my initial remarks, that is transforming things extremely rapidly. One thing that we haven't touched upon is how do we change the relationship between the customer and the industry? Is it something that we need to look into? For instance, is it desirable to have the ability to produce? It's just as important as the rest? And what I would like the audience to think about is to see industry as a capability in its own merit, you know, as almost a fighting domain next to land, sea, air, cyberspace, and space. Because we see that the competition is fierce there, including with our adversaries, and that our ability to produce and outproduce our adversaries, our ability to innovate is absolutely critical. It is a different environment that we have to all prepare together.
Okay, super. Well, thank you very much to our panel. Apologies for the strange start, but our next panel is actually here. So, yeah, hopefully we can crack on with that one straight away. But thank you very much, and cheers. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.